You know, as women, we are bombarded with the message that we need to do a better job with self-care, right? We need to take more time for ourselves and do what's best for us. And although there is great truth to that sentiment, my next guest says if we aren't careful, we can start to confuse self-empowerment with selfishness. It's a point Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson started to make last week on the show when she framed self-care through the lens of forgiveness. Let's take a look.
Because no matter the transgression, no matter the distance, we still have to forgive in order to be healthy.
I love this.
So this is about us. You want to talk self-care? Forgive people.
Heather emphasized that self-care is not holding grudges or putting up cement walls when people don't act just so. So this week, we're opening the self-care doors to explore what taking care of ourselves in a healthy way actually looks like. Heather is joining me to dive deeper into this topic, and I'm so glad we're going deeper because I'm just going to say it, and I think I said it last week on the show as well. I have come to loathe the phrase self-care.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I don't like hearing it. I don't love it. We have ruined it. We've ruined it.
How do you define healthy self-care? What are we getting wrong? How should we be looking at it?
Well, unfortunately, we look at it as, and I recognize the stereotypes I'm throwing out as we have this conversation.
Okay.
We look at it as retail therapy, we look at it as excess caffeine, as a gallon of ice cream, as avoiding the things that need done, as a lot of Netflix. We tend to look at those things as self-care. Self-care is actually those things that recharge us, that refuel us. Self-care is not avoidance, right? Examples of self-care. Self-care would be developing understandings in family relationships instead of not going to the family parties. That would be self-care. Self-care would be actually managing your sleep instead of staying up all night and then having to sleep all morning in order to make sense of it. It would be dressing your body in ways that helps you feel comfortable, not retail therapy, right? So when we look at these things, even accepting help from other people instead of feeling like we have to do it all ourselves, those would all be good versus uncomfortable or unhealthy versions of self-care. It recharges us, it refuels us, it refreshes us. It is not an avoidance process.
What you described is work. Actually, it takes work to have those hard connective conversations, right? To establish appropriate relationships with those we love. It takes work to get yourself to bed. When I really do want to stay up and watch one more episode, it's work.
Well, and the problem with it is when we don't understand self-care, everything we do actually is the opposite of taking care of ourselves. So let's just go back again to the stereotypes, to spending retail therapy, to ice cream, to Netflix,
Bubble
to not
baths.
sleeping, all of those things, right? All of those things, they don't actually take care of me. They actually do the exact opposite when I engage in all of those things. So we're doing the opposite of what we say we're trying to accomplish when we don't understand what taking care of ourselves really looks like.
You have 6 ways to extend that definition and truly better care for the spirit and the bodies that we are. First, you want us to remember the relationship. And this is an interesting connection point to tie relationships with the idea of self-care.
Right, and what we're looking at here is the relationship between self-care and accomplishing. So what we want to recognize is we hear from the world that self-care is avoiding, but the relationship we're trying to build is actually between the activities we choose, the thinking that we have, and its ability to help us accomplish. Genuine self-care recharges me so that I can live my life better. It recharges me so that I can be engaged with my family and manage external family relationships and tackle what I have every day. That's what genuine self-care is. So the relationship, unfortunately, is not between the activities we choose and avoiding our responsibilities. It's to help us accomplish. It's to help us do. That's the relationship we have to look at here.
Self-care, you want us to look at it not as an event, but as an ongoing practice or work.
All the time. It is. It's work and it's ongoing. We tend to look at self-care as a one-hit wonder, right? I'm going to go shopping today, or I'm going to stay up tonight, or I'm going to avoid this thing right now.
Yeah, box check, I'm done.
And we're done. It has to be ongoing because our lives and the challenges are ongoing. Self-care is every day. So it's those things that are going to help us avoid burnout. And more than that, it stacks. So when I take care of myself today and tomorrow and the next day, it stacks and builds and stacks and builds and helps buoy me up. Almost kind of like a bank account. So when it's an ongoing process, when all of a sudden somebody comes to call, right? The debt collector comes to ask for the money. I am ready and my bank account is full.
You have a reserve.
That's what self-care is. It provides that reserve.
Your definition of self-care includes this idea of mindful changes.
Mindful changes. So if we're genuinely concerned about taking care of ourselves, we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at the behaviors and we're going to look at the thinking patterns that don't serve us well. Self-care is being willing to take a step back and make mindful changes to how we think and to how we behave. Now, is that work? Yeah, it is. It's work, right? If I recognize that I have a thought pattern towards a family member that's not benefiting me, self-care is managing that thinking pattern and making changes. If there's behavior in my life that is not benefiting our family, self-care is taking a step back and doing what I need to do to change the behavior in order to show up. Remember, self-care is making those choices that recharge us and give us energy to actually live our lives. That's what self-care does.
With this definition, it speaks to this idea of personal growth, right? We talk about the reserve and the bank account, or the recharge and the refuel. It's ultimately helping us grow as a person.
It is, and choosing growth, right? So what tends to happen is we get self-care mixed up with self-protection, unfortunately. And self-protection doesn't benefit us, right? We want self-care to benefit us, if we're going to keep using that word.
Yeah.
And self-protection doesn't. Now, again, stereotypes, but it's also true. I hear a lot of times from women in my office that their choice to drink an excess amount of caffeine every day is self-care. That's the choice they're making, right? And when I say excess, I mean excess, right? That they're drinking that all day, and that they'll say, this is my self-care. This right here, this Diet Coke is my self-care. Actually, it's self-protection. It keeps them from doing the things that would actually take care of themselves. It keeps them from managing their sleep and their movement and what they eat and connections with their family.
You're right.
It keeps them from those things. So instead of choosing to self-protect, if we want to take care of ourselves, we have to choose to grow. Growth is the opposite of self-protection.
Oftentimes when we talk about self-care, the word boundaries come into play. And as you described self-protection versus self-care or personal growth, I've had several conversations in the last 6 months to a year with friends, family members, colleagues who are all about to enter the new phase of grandma. And it's been on my mind because all of them had something in common, and that was within this first trimester talk. I mean, we're talking new announcement, new baby coming in a year. They immediately have thrown down these boundaries. I think in an attempt to promote self-care, saying, I'm not the babysitter,
right.
I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna do that. And I've been kind of taken back, and they have their reasons, and I'm sure they're justified in feeling that way. At the same time, I find myself thinking, if my grandma and my mom would have thrown up boundaries like that, or led with that idea of self-care,
right.
would I be the woman that I was today? We've almost become obsessed with this idea to the point that I worry and wonder how it's going to affect our relationships.
Well, and that's such a good example of self-protection, right? They become so worried about being taken advantage of, or that they might be asked to babysit nonstop and then they can't do any of the other things they love.
Yeah.
Or maybe they've prepared for this phase in their life and now they've decided this new baby's going to potentially change that for them.
Yeah.
Where really what self-care would be is actually having a conversation, not at week 1 of the pregnancy,
right.
but down the line to say, hey, here's where I'm at in life. And here's what would feel really great as far as being engaged and involved in the life of this new grandbaby.
Yeah.
What is it that you're in need of? And let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
That's self-care. Self-protection is putting up those walls and handling it the way you're hearing it. It's why it feels so uncomfortable. It's avoiding those things that actually help us grow.
Well said. In our last quick 20 seconds, you want us to get comfortable with the idea that self-care is uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. It can be. It doesn't mean it's always uncomfortable, but recognizing it can be uncomfortable. And then dealing with it, changing our thinking mindfully and changing our behavior mindfully, going to bed when that sounds like more work to manage my sleep or thinking, opposed to staying up to binge Netflix, that can be really uncomfortable. And we do so much justification that keeps us from actually recognizing what self-care really looks like.
I love the way
we got to take a step back.
I love it. New definition for the word that I might be able to accept a little bit more if we frame it like that. Heather, thank you so much. Heather coaches and counsels families and individuals. You can find her information on our website.